trunk, and then we have the carotid and the subclavian on the left. So it's a little bit different from right to left. So from our right side, we go from our left ventricle to our ascending aorta, the aortic arch, and then into our brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, our brachiocephalic trunk is going to give rise to our right subclavian and our carotid artery. I don't know what's going on there. Okay. Anyway, yeah, so that's the right side. The left side is coming from the left ventricle. It's going to do the same thing into the ascending aorta, into the aortic arch, but on the left we have a direct branch off of the aortic arch, our left subclavian. Okay. This is just a more realistic image of the blood supply. So from our subclavian artery, we pass under the clavicle or the lateral border of the first rib, whichever like border you would like to use, and it becomes the axillary artery. So it just changes names from subclavian to axillary on both right and left. Okay. So our axillary artery begins at the lateral border of our first rib right here. Okay. And it's going to go posterior or under our pec minor muscle, and our pec minor is actually going to separate the divisions of our axillary. So under our pec minor is our middle division of our axillary, or second division. And then our axillary artery ends at the inferior border of our teres major muscle, so right about here. Okay. And then it becomes the brachial artery. So we can kind of see that here. We have, this is subclavian. Once it passes the lateral border of the first rib up here or under the clavicle, it becomes axillary. Okay. This is our pec minor. So you can see axillary traveling under or posterior to pec minor. And then once it passes the lateral border of teres major, or the inferior border of teres major, it becomes the brachial artery. So it's just changing names as it's passing by different structures. Okay. So if we look at our first part of our axillary artery is split into 3 divisions. Okay, our first division or our first part has one branch, and that branch is the superior thoracic artery. And it's traveling right here to the superior thoracic cage or wall. Okay. Our first part is the borders of our first portion of our axillary are from the lateral aspect of the first rib all the way down to the superior border, of pec minor. Okay, so pec minor would be like right here. So the superior border of pec minor is the very end of our first part of our axillary. Any questions? Our second division, our second part, has 2 branches, and this second part is located under our pec minor muscle. So our pec minor runs like this, and if you reflect it up, you'll see these 2 branches on our second part of our axillary artery. Our 2 branches are our thoracoacromial artery, or our thoracoacromial trunk. Okay, and our thoracoacromial trunk has its own branches as well as the lateral thoracic artery. Okay, the lateral thoracic artery runs with the long thoracic artery. So the way I remember, like the difference, so there's no lateral thoracic nerve. It's lateral thoracic artery and long thoracic nerve. Okay, so long has an N in it, that's the nerve, and lateral has an A in it, and that's the artery. Med student this past year made up the worst rhyme. It makes no sense that it's hard to forget it. It was rose, and I've forgotten it, but it's roses are red, violets are blue, the lateral thoracic artery innervates serratus anterior. That's what it is. And I'm like, that's literally the worst rhyme I've ever heard in my life. And he was like, yeah, that's why you remember it. I'm like, I'm never telling anybody that, and now I tell everybody that. So it works. You'll remember it. Or you could even say the long thoracic nerve, whatever. So the second part is located posterior to pec minor, and it has those two branches. Our thoracoacromial trunk, you can call it thoracoacromial trunk or thoracoacromial artery. Either will be acceptable, and it has it's 4 branches that you probably won't see in lab. You might see a little bit. So it has our, people like remember the divisions of our thoracoacromial artery as Akron City Police Department. So acromial, clavicular, pectoral, and deltoid branches of the artery. So like you have your pec, your clavicular, your acromial branch, and your deltoid branch.
Wait, could you say the mnemonic again and what it
Akron
stands for?
City Police Department, or California Police Department, CAPD, whatever. Assign anything to those letters and it'll be what it is.
What's the D for?
Deltoid branches. I don't think you guys will be held responsible for them, but it's always good to know. Our third part of our axillary is located as you pass by pec minor, so the inferior border of pec minor right here, all the way to the inferior border of teres major, okay? And our third part has 3 branches, kind of. The first branch is our subscapular artery, so you can kind of see subscapular coming down, okay? Our subscapular artery is going to give off 2 branches, okay? It's gonna split. So our subscapular comes off, and one will kind of go back and circumflex around the scapula, and that's our circumflex scapular artery. The other will come straight down, and it's our thoracodorsal artery, which probably runs with our, it goes to lats, but it runs with the thoracodorsal nerve, okay? Oh, she didn't give you chord levels. I was about to ask you which chord levels it came from. Okay, our last 2 branches of our third division are anterior and posterior circumflex, okay? So sometimes these branches will come off as one and then split into 2, so just keep that in mind. Sometimes they don't always come off as different arteries, but this is your anterior circumflex going anterior and circumflexing around the humerus, and then your posterior circumflex going posterior and circumflexing around, and they will anastomose on the other side of the humerus. Anterior circumflex humeral artery basically gives the artery its name, right? Where it's coursing. So our axillary passes the inferior border of teres major, and it changes names to our brachial artery, okay? Our brachial artery is gonna give off this profunda brachii, or deep brachial artery. Our deep brachial artery comes off of this brachial artery. You'll be able to see it in a different image, but it's like coming off right here and going back. And it's gonna travel in the radial groove with the radial nerve. You guys knew that though, if I would have tested you on it. Where does the radial nerve travel? In the radial groove. So it's running with this deep brachial artery. The brachial artery will then continue, and in the cubital fossa, it'll split into a radial artery, radius, and an ulnar artery on the ulnar side. Okay. So we can see here, this is the teres major muscle. The inferior border is where axillary becomes brachial. So this is our brachial artery. Okay. This right here is our deep brachial. Okay, and you can see it here like shadowed out. That's it traveling in the radial groove. Okay. And that'll split into give like branches around the elbow, so you guys don't need to know those yet. So the brachial artery will continue down, and it will split in this cubital fossa right here, so this portion, Okay, under the bicipital aponeurosis, okay, so that's our vein travels above the bicipital aponeurosis, and then our artery travels under it. So if you hear a pop, you've hit the aponeurosis and you're too deep when you like go to do intravenous injections or draw blood or whatever. And that's where it'll split into a radial artery and an ulnar artery.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I had this question over the weekend, and I think this might be the answer.
Okay.
But when we had to learn the origin for triceps brachii, there was something that was superior to the radial groove, and I wanted to know, like why that was relevant, why that was important.
Your long head of triceps goes all the way like through your shoulder to help with like arm movement. Is that what you mean?
More so.
And where like medial and lateral head
More so,
insert?
it's the posterior surface of the humerus, but specifically it says superior to the radial groove. I was
and
like,
one is inferior to the radial groove.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just like where they're originating. So
But it's nothing to do with their
making it
supply.
like superior to the radial groove versus inferior to the radial groove makes the muscle more medial and more lateral, so that you get like a medial head and a lateral head of the triceps.
Okay.
Yeah, that's no, it doesn't really like. It's not really like a huge deal. For origins and insertions, I don't know if you guys have caught on from the last practical, but we're gonna ask you like the big origins and insertions, like where it's like a tibial tuberosity or gluteal tuberosity, or the coracoid process. Like, we won't ask you like mid shaft of the humerus and it has what attachment. It's like nobody cares. I'm kidding, we care, but you can like look that up, and that's very like arbitrary, whereas like the coracoid process has 3 things that attach there, like 3 muscles that attach there, right?
Yeah.
Do you guys know them?
Yeah.
What are they?
Coracobrachialis.
Coracobrachialis, pec minor, and
The short head of the biceps brachii.
okay. Cool, so this is just another image showing you the same thing. You can see, this is from a posterior view, so you can see this is your posterior circumflex humeral artery. You can see your deep brachial artery here, and this nerve running with it is radial nerve, which comes from what cord levels?
Girl.
C5 to T1, good, all of them. Okay, so in the cubital fossa, you'll see the brachial artery here splitting into your radial and your ulnar arteries.
Is it, sorry,
Yeah.
I had a question.
No, you're
Is
fine.
one posterior, one
One is just kind of traveling like ulnar, you have to like reflect some muscles. It's gonna go under this pronator teres and then kind of pop out. You'll see it again. And then radial kind of goes over pronator teres. But pronator teres is that, you guys have seen it, it's that really small one. So it's in this image, because of how it's cut off, you don't see it like popping out, but it does pop back out. So in our cubital fossa, you can also see this right here. What's this nerve? It's highlighted, so I'll just tell you the median nerve. But what cord levels does it come from? Yes, C5 to T1, and we see our ulnar nerve going posterior or on the olecranon process, and that comes from
C8 to T1.
C8 to T1. Good. Okay, and here's what I was talking about. So you can see the artery, the brachial artery, it splits under this bicipital aponeurosis, and this vein has been reflected off of the aponeurosis. So the artery is traveling under this aponeurosis, serves as protection, right? And we've cut the aponeurosis to be able to see the splitting of the artery in this image. So if we look at a continuation of these arteries, our ulnar artery, which is right here, is going to give off this common interosseous artery, okay? I'm gonna just preface, there's a bunch of branches, and off of this artery, like your deep brachial, your radial, your ulnar, your common interosseous, there are arteries that are coming off and forming an anastomosis around the elbow. Do you guys know what an anastomosis is? So it's basically where arteries, like two arteries, come together, and it serves for protection and collateral circulation. So if there's a block in a vessel, you can reroute blood up or down to get out distally, so that you're not losing tissue and blood flow to the tissue. Okay. So the common interosseous gives off two branches, the anterior and posterior interosseous arteries that are running along the interosseous membrane. But you can see like a bunch of other branches here, and those are those anastomoses, the elbow anastomoses. And common interosseous gives off one of them. So for this purpose, you only need to know ulnar gives off a common interosseous, which gives arteries going anterior and posterior to the interosseous membrane. And our radial artery is basically going to come all the way down. Okay. Our radial artery is traveling along the lateral aspect of our forearm, and it's going to give rise to this deep palmar arch in the hand. Okay. The ulnar artery is going to give rise to the superficial palmar arch in the hand. So there are two arches in the hand. One of them is superficial, coming from ulnar, and one of them is deep, coming from radial. And I believe that this crisscross is depicting, like, so you can see here the superficial palmar arch from ulnar comes into radial, right? Well, radial actually gives off a branch that's going to anastomose with this arch off of ulnar, so they like connect to each other, so it's kind of like two connections, but the main contribution of this superficial palmar arch is ulnar, and the main contribution of the deep palmar arch is radial. Okay. So when you're measuring heart rate, the most common place to measure is right here, okay, where your radial artery is located. It's on the anterior surface and the distal end of the radius, which is right there, right this bone. So the radial artery is lying between two tendons. The tendons are flexor carpi radialis and our adductor pollicis longus muscles. So the only thing that's covering it is like fascia and skin, so it's an easy place to pick up the artery. Another place to measure heart rate or pulse can be right here in this anatomical snuff box. And we'll learn about this when we get into special areas of the upper limb, but our anatomical snuff box is basically made by the tendons of your extensor pollicis longus, and then extensor pollicis brevis and adductor pollicis longus. You have this snuff box, and the radial artery can be picked up there. You can't see my snuff box because my hands are really chubby, but everybody else's you can usually see. So if you can't find yours, if you just like extend and abduct your thumb, you can kind of feel it. I can't ever feel it. I don't know. I can't ever find my snuff box. I like feel my snuff box, but I can't get deep enough into the artery to feel my pulse. And your thumb also has a pulse, so pick it up with your like fingers, not with your other thumb. You might be picking that place up. Okay. So if we look at our terminal branches of our radial and ulnar artery that we've already kind of talked about, our radial artery is going to enter the hand and give rise to this deep palmar arch, which is right here. Okay, so this is the radial artery giving rise to the deep palmar arch. This ulnar artery is going to give a branch that's going to join with the deep palmar arch. Okay. The ulnar artery enters the hand and give rise to the superficial palmar arch. Okay, and there's a branch from our radial artery that's going to join with the superficial palmar arch. It's going to anastomose, right? Okay, so here's what anastomoses are. So anastomoses are huge in the body, your head and neck especially. You have a lot of venous anastomoses. But our arterial anastomoses are where two arteries that are running in the same region kind of form a union between their branches so that it provides collateral circulation so that if there is a blockage of flow, you can still get blood out to the distal areas. And then the venous anastomoses are, so the reason that we don't focus on veins in the body is because there's so many interconnections and different branches of veins that are unnamed because it's like so widespread throughout the body, but they're very abundant and they're basically an interconnection of one vein draining into the same area and coming together. So it's just joining of vessels. And that the clinical importance is for blockage of blood flow. So if we look at this like flow chart, we have it's a lot here. We didn't really talk too much about the vessels of the actual hand, but we will talk about them now. So if we kind of pick up from our superficial and deep palmar arches in the hand, so everything we've talked about, you don't need to know, I'm gonna tell you what you don't need to know right now. You don't need to worry about left common carotid and its branches. You don't need to worry about left vertebral and its branches. You don't need to know about right common carotid and any of its branches or right vertebral. This is all brain stuff. So you will need to know it eventually, but not right now.
Can you repeat those for?
Yeah, basically all you need to know is this. The brachiocephalic trunk to the right subclavian, to the right axillary, and down. And then it would be the same on the left side, so you should know the left-sided branching as well, but it's just not drawn here. Nothing in the middle you need to worry about. Okay, so right axillary, so axillary passes what border to become brachial? Yep, the lateral or inferior border of teres major, right? Becomes right brachial, and then it splits into the radial and ulnar arteries, where? In the cubital fossa, good. Under or over the bicipital aponeurosis? Under, good. If we follow our radial artery is going to give rise to this, technically the deep palmar arch and a branch to the superficial palmar arch. Our deep palmar arch, we can see here, is the shorter one. Our deep palmar arch is going to give rise to these palmar metacarpal arteries right here. Our superficial palmar arch comes mainly from our ulnar artery. So we can see this here. Our superficial palmar arch is going to give rise to our common palmar digital arteries, which our palmar metacarpals are going to drain into. And our common palmar digital arteries are going to split into our proper palmar digital arteries. So you go from common to proper. And the proper palmar digitals are in the fingers. Okay. This is a review of the arteries that we've gone through, the big arteries. What was left out on this? What also comes off of brachial? The deep brachial, good. And then obviously there's a lot of branches left off of the axillary, yeah.
So when you depress your fingers and you try to see like your sign on it, is that your proper palmar that you're depressing?
Yeah. So then we have our deep brachial left off, and then what else was left off of ulnar? The common interosseous, good. Okay, so veins. we don't really focus on the deep veins, we mainly focus on the superficial veins because in the upper limb and the lower limb, they're very distinct, right? Our deep veins are basically, all of our arteries have a vein running with them. Sometimes it's two veins, running around the same artery. So like here in the forearm, there are usually two veins, and these paired veins are called the venae comititans, I don't know. But veins basically travel with the arteries. Our superficial veins are the more important of all of our veins because they're distinct and you can see them. So we have our cephalic vein and our basilic vein in our upper limb. Our cephalic vein is gonna kind of run in this deltopectoral groove between our deltoid and our pec muscles, so that's where you'll see it in the body. And it'll run on the lateral aspect of the arm and the forearm. Our basilic vein is running on the medial aspect of our arm and forearm, okay? Our basilic vein is going to kind of drain into or form the axillary vein, okay? And our cephalic vein also drains into our axillary vein, just higher up, okay? So basilic kind of comes in and forms our axillary, and cephalic drains into the axillary. Our median cubital vein is located in our cubital fossa on top of the bicipital aponeurosis, and it's the joining between our cephalic and our basilic veins, and this is where you draw blood, usually. This is just a summary. So if we think about vein draining, a lot of people talk about it this way. Okay, but you have to remember that it's actually going up into the heart. Okay. So if we start from out here and kind of follow venous drainage back into the heart, so cephalic and basilic have drained into our axillary. Axillary becomes subclavian, right? Because it drains into subclavian. Subclavian and internal jugular join together to form our brachiocephalic vein. You have a right and a left brachiocephalic vein. You only have one brachiocephalic trunk, which is located on the right, but you have two brachiocephalic veins. That make sense? You guys just look confused, so I'm just leaving it a little on. Okay. So the brachiocephalic vein will then, both of them will come together to form the superior vena cava, or drain into the superior vena cava, which will go directly into the right atrium of the heart. Okay? So the brachiocephalic trunk comes off of the aortic arch, right here. The brachiocephalic trunk is only located on the right side. Okay? So off of your aortic arch, what are our branches? It's our ABCs. So we have aortic arch, brachiocephalic trunk, common carotid, left common carotid, and then our left subclavian, right? Our brachiocephalic trunk will split into a right subclavian and a right common carotid, okay? But in the veins, we have our subclavian and our internal jugular coming to form the right brachiocephalic vein, and we also have our left subclavian and left internal jugular vein joining and forming the left brachiocephalic vein. So right and left brachiocephalic veins, okay? Our external jugular will drain directly into subclavian as it's coming to join with internal. So you can kind of see that here. We have our axillary And then up here, we have our subclavian. External jugular drains into subclavian, subclavian continues and drains into this brachiocephalic vein with our internal jugular. So once internal and subclavian join together, that's where it becomes brachiocephalic. Then brachiocephalic veins from both sides go into the superior vena cava, and our superior vena cava dumps right into which part of the heart?
Radiatrium.
The radiatrium. Okay. Any questions?